What's going on, TOEFL takers? So this is Josh from TST Prep, where we help you get your TOEFL score as quickly and easily as possible. And today we have a special treat for you. We have Kathy Spratt from House of TOEFL here to share a lesson about TOEFL vocabulary, and especially for the reading section, answering TOEFL reading vocabulary questions. So we're really excited to have her here. It's a real honor. She's been teaching TOEFL for quite a while. And so I'm going to stop talking, let Kathy take over, and if you stick around, you get to hear a short interview with her about her experience and some extra advice about the TOEFL reading. Well, anyway, let's get to the lesson.
Hello everyone, this is Kathy from House of TOEFL, and today we're going to go over a few basic vocabulary tips for the reading section in the TOEFL IBT. So we're just going to go over a few basic tips, and this video should be pretty easy to follow, but even though the sentences I'm going to give you today are fairly easy, you can still apply these tips to much harder material. So let's get started. One tip is to look for words that show contrast. Now, these words can give you an important clue, and I will explain why in a moment. The words I'm referring to are words like but, on the other hand, in contrast, while, whereas, conversely, unlike, and though. Because if you see those words and then your vocabulary word is close to it, you can use it to see what the relationship is. For example, here's a simple sentence to get us started. Unlike his quiet brother, John is loquacious. So we have unlike and quiet. And then John is loquacious. So loquacious must mean something different than quiet. Then when we look at our four answer choices, the word that is the most different from quiet is the second word, talkative. Now, if you want to go ahead and pause the video and read these and make your guesses, you can do so now. Go ahead and pause. And we're back. So if you've had a chance to read this, you see that when they're talking about amphibians, the emphasis is on their need for water because they spend part of their life in aquatic environments. But reptiles, on the other hand, can survive in arid climates. So arid must mean something very different from aquatic. So I hope you guessed the third answer, dry, the correct answer. Now for the second one, we see that sunflowers are hardy, and we have the word whereas. Then it says trilliums are extremely delicate. So hardy must mean something very different from delicate because of the word whereas. So the correct answer is the first answer, robust. Robust means something is strong and tough. So it is quite opposite of delicate. Okay, go ahead and pause the video here and make your guesses. Okay, for the first example, the answer is the fourth answer, competition, because it must mean something different than how they're friends, they're lifelong friends and allies. But the word that is different from being a friend and ally is a rival. In other words, you have a competition with someone. So the fourth answer is correct. Now, for the next one, we have people who exercise regularly, but then we have in contrast. So it must be something different. So what's different than regularly? Well, sporadically, which means occasionally. Therefore, the second answer is the correct answer. All right, now, people who take the TOEFL IBT are typically adults, and they have a lot of knowledge about the world, about businesses, about advertising, about the environment, about animals, about the oceans, and so on and so forth. So this knowledge is a great tool to help you to get the right answer. Take a moment to pause the video now and try to guess the correct answer. And we're back. So what do we know about Apple? Well, we know that Apple makes a lot of money. So for describing Apple, the most likely word we're going to use is something that indicates how much money they make. Therefore, the word lucrative is actually a synonym to the fourth word, profitable, because Apple, as we all know, makes a lot of money. Okay, if you would like to take a moment to pause and try these two, go ahead now. Okay, and we're back. So if you've ever been to China, or if you know anything about China, you know it is a very highly populated country. The population is dense. The best synonym for dense is compacted, the first answer. Second, if you've ever had any encounter with a rattlesnake, or if you know anything about a rattlesnake, you know that they have venom, which is a poison. Therefore, the second answer is correct. Okay, take a moment here to pause the video. Okay, and we're back. So this is about a tortoise. Now, what is a tortoise the most famous for? It's most famous for having a long life. In fact, some tortoises live over 100 years, longer than the average human. Therefore, the correct answer is the third answer, a long life. Okay, now let's say you don't know anything about the animal or the subject being discussed. You can still use the context. So let's try this one about giraffes. Go ahead and pause the video. Okay, and we're back. Hopefully you picked the third word. So how do we know that this is correct? Well, because the context tells us that food is readily available. Now, you know if food is readily available to an animal, it's going to do very well. It's going to succeed and it's going to be able to reproduce. So the closest word to that is flourish, because flourish means to do very well in an environment, to really succeed and be able to survive and produce offspring. Okay, this one's a little longer, so please feel free to pause the video. Okay, so now that you've had a chance to read all this, you've noticed that Alexander Fleming came up with this quite by accident. Nonetheless, this invention saved millions of lives. Therefore, this was a lucky innovation. So the fourth answer is correct, fortuitous, which means to bring luck, to be lucky. Okay, go ahead and pause the video. This one has two words. Okay, and we're back. Now, exotic, you may have guessed, is foreign, the first answer. So how do we know that from the context? Well, we know that tigers are originally from Asia, but this paragraph is talking about them being in captivity or being kept as zoos in the United States, which means they were brought from another country. That makes them foreign animals, the first answer. Now, vast. Vast means extensive. So how do we know? Because the context tells us that they need 40 square miles in their enclosure. That's a lot of land. So the only one that makes sense is the second word, extensive, meaning that it extends over a broad area. Okay, so that wraps up our very short tutorial. Hopefully you picked up a few tips here. Now, there is a lot more about this in my book, Mastering the Reading Section for the TOEFL. This can be purchased on Amazon. It's an electronic book that can be read on any device. For more information about the TOEFL and about me, and to watch many, many more of my videos and to read my blog, you can go to www.houseoftoefl.com. I also do private tutoring and have many other services. So again, this is Kathy from House of TOEFL, and as I always say, good luck on your TOEFL, and thank you for watching this short video about the reading section and specifically the vocabulary.
Thank you for sharing your lesson, Kathy. I'm here right now with Kathy Spratt from House of TOEFL, who just taught us about TOEFL vocabulary and some strategies to help answering those questions. So first of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing your materials. I'm sure most people found it helpful. Now, you want to just tell me a little bit about yourself, kind of your history teaching TOEFL?
So I've been teaching TOEFL for about 10 years. And I got into it quite by accident. I was working at an ESL school, and they needed a TOEFL teacher. They asked me if I wanted to do it. I was very hesitant, but I took home a few books. I had a weekend to learn everything about the TOEFL. Suffice it to say, that was not enough, but it was enough that when I showed up on Monday, I could get through the lesson. That was back in 2010. Right. And I thought I would spend about a year teaching TOEFL, but I ended up really liking it because I meet interesting people who have really interesting stories, but also I'm learning at the same time, because when I'm reading a passage, it's definitely not something I have had the opportunity to study, or listening to a lecture. So right. It's part of my intellectual growth as well. So that's why I ended up staying in it for so long. When I initially thought this is going to be a year maximum of my life, now it's been probably more than 10 years. So that's how I got into TOEFL, and that's why I'm still here.
That's great. So you said that you had to prepare over a weekend. So I think a lot of students actually have similar situations, especially when they first take the test, that they, kind of rush through trying to study and prepare. Is there something that you kind of wish you knew when you first started teaching that you know now? I'm sure there are a lot of things, but is there, one thing that stands out about the test that maybe might be helpful for students that you wish you knew when you first started?
Sure. Well, one thing I didn't know when I first started was how the speaking and the writing were assessed. Okay. All I knew was that, okay, it's out of 30. So 30 is the best you can do. I had no idea when I first started teaching it, because the school I worked with didn't offer me any training. They just handed me a textbook. Right. Not an ETS textbook. It was a third-party textbook. I don't remember the brand, but
maybe Longman or McGraw-Hill or something.
Who knows? I feel like it was Delta, but might even be older than that. I don't know. But it didn't give me any clear understanding of how the ETS actually rated students and how they came up with that final number out of 30. And I certainly wished I had known that what that number represented was an average of the scores across the speaking and across the writing. Because at that point, now again, we're going back 10 years, but I was just guessing. I would be like, oh, I think this essay feels like a 20 out of 30, but I didn't actually know I had never seen the rubrics. Right. That's why I tell students, and in a lot of my videos, you'll see me put the web address of the rubric, because I really do believe you can't give them what you want if you don't know what they're looking for. And I'm amazed how many of my students have never seen the rubric. So
yeah, I mean, it's a kind of random document online, so yeah, it's kind of hard to find, and that's great. Yeah, so you give them grading rubrics, speaking and writing. You wish you kind of knew a bit better, like how students are actually scored, and students can find out now through rubrics and some other information. So great. And in this in the video, you gave some examples of like how to figure out the meaning of a word based on the contrast words or some other examples. So the test changed recently, the new TOEFL. So with answering vocabulary and doing these strategies, is anything different compared to the older version? So the test changed August 1st, 2019. Is there any difference between the vocabulary strategies from before and now?
It's not the strategies that have changed. Those strategies are permanent and will not only work in the TOEFL, they'll also work in your reading once you get to college or university. It's the frequency of the questions that has changed. So there used to be, and in the first and second version of my book, I said that vocabulary is the #1 question they're going to ask you in terms of frequency. Now there's only one vocabulary per passage. You might get 2, but typically you're only going to get 1. So now you're going to see more of detailed questions, or they're also called factual information questions, and negative factual information questions. But it doesn't mean, and I'm not saying that vocabulary is now less important to study, because I still think it's the #1 thing you can do to improve your score, because you need it on all 4 sections. You can't answer any other question without it on the reading, even non-vocabulary questions. So I'm not trying to decrease or imply that you should decrease your focus on vocabulary. You shouldn't. You should still study it as much, but be prepared for there to only be one vocab question per passage rather than 3 or 4 even sometimes there was.
Right. So the strategy is the same, but just pretty much less questions. And that's a nice segue to the next question I was going to ask you is that, are there any books that you recommend to help students improve their vocabulary? So even though there might be only one question per passage or 3 or 4 or 5 in the whole test, you still need to know a lot of vocabulary for the reading. Is there anything that you would recommend, any books that you recommend for students who need to improve their vocabulary?
Now, Barron's makes a really nice book called Barron's Must-Have Words for the TOEFL. I think,
Okay.
is it 500, Josh? Barron's 500 must-have words?
I think it's 400.
But it's made by Barron's, and I recommend that one. The reason I like the Barron's vocab, now I want to emphasize, I'm not talking about the Barron's Complete Guide. I'm talking about their vocabulary book.
Okay.
The reason that I like it is because it has the definitions, then it has a short quiz, then it puts them into a context. So that means you're exposed to the word 3 times. So you've already, by being exposed to it 3 times, that's already part way to, we know that you need 7 exposures to a word before you have it memorized. At 3, you're part way there. This one I liked as well. Now, not everybody loves this one, and that's fine, but
maybe that's the one I was thinking of, the 400. Yeah. Okay.
This one is not the Barron's. This one is McGraw-Hill, but it's also kind of nice because it will have the words and the definitions, and then it will have multiple choice questions. But what I really like at the end is there's a short reading passage, and then there's a few questions that not only put the vocabulary in context, but some of these are factual information or negative factual information. So it's a little bit of everything, but just has an emphasis on vocabulary. So
nice.
I quite like this. It's quite nice, and it's divided into topics. Like, for example, government and justice, and then so all the next few chapters are about everything to do with government and justice and culture. So I think it's very nicely organized as well. It's like it's an attractive book.
Good, that's great. So so McGraw-Hill, 400 words, and there's a Barron's vocabulary book as well. That's great. And so in general, students who are struggling with the reading in general, what advice would you give? So maybe not just vocabulary. Maybe there's time management. Maybe there's just comprehension, just don't understand. There could be a lot of different things. Is there anything that you recommend for just improving your reading in general?
This is going to sound really self-serving, but buy my book.
There you go. Yeah.
No, I don't. The thing is, okay, guys, I put 3 years of my life into this book. So, and I don't even barely make money off of it. It was a passion project. It really was. It wasn't like, oh, I'm going to make $1 million. No, it was like, I wanted to have something so students didn't always have to take classes. They didn't always have to take lessons. So everything that I know about the reading, I always use this analogy, I downloaded it into this book that's $9.99, and it's called Mastering the Reading for the TOEFL IBT. You should get the 3rd edition. The reason I recommend my book is my book does something that no other book does, which is I not only tell you which answer is correct, I tell you why the other answers are incorrect. So I don't say A is correct because, and then leave it. Because the student's sitting there, if they pick C and they say, okay, but why is my answer wrong? I will say B is wrong because it has, it's the same traps. So I teach the traps at the beginning. Then as you go through, you're seeing the traps. I'll say B is the trap of, and then referring back to the traps so that you know all the traps. Now, putting my book aside, the best advice of reading comprehension is to build your vocabulary. That's where you have to start always. And read. So the more you read, the more you're going to understand. And read for pleasure. Don't just read. You don't have to be stuck just reading TOEFL stuff. Hey, if you want to read Harry Potter, read Harry Potter. Nothing in English is going to hurt your progress. Like everything that you read in the English language is going to be good as long as it's a high quality source, as long as it's not, a beauty magazine. But if you're reading something that is a respected book, then you're on the right track. But of course, with the emphasis, you still are going to have to go back and practice actual TOEFL materials because it is different than reading a novel. But to get your comprehension up, you could start with fun books. You could start with the Hunger Games.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. So if you want to build it up and maybe you're struggling with academic reading, like the TOEFL, for example, you might want to read something a little bit more fun, like the Hunger Games or Harry Potter or something. And then you build yourself up to that level if you needed to do that. Or you could just mix them, or just mix the two. Yeah.
Mix them. But reading should be fun. I mean, I love to read. I read for pleasure. I read about 2 books a week. So
Nice.
reading should be something that, like, I don't dread it. I look forward to it. I can't wait till the end of the day because once all my teaching is done, I can go upstairs and then I get to read my book. So, I've had this love of reading since I was a child, so I'm lucky, but reading shouldn't be something that is dreadful, is a chore. It should be something, and so that's why I mentioned Harry Potter, because I don't want students to always think they're always going to have to read about the atmosphere on Venus. Things you're interested in, you don't have to, it's not black or white. You can say, okay, I'm going to read a little bit about this and then treat myself to the Harry Potter book.
Right.
Hurt myself with this. So you don't have it in your mind that reading it, oh, I hate reading in English. I hate it. Because there's so many wonderful books. I'm telling you, there's millions of them, literally. They're so great to read.
Yeah, it's really, what I find that students who succeed tend to be readers. That they like to read for pleasure. It's not something that's a chore. It's something that they find enjoyable and fun to do. And I mean, maybe the TOEFL's a bit of a chore, but for the most part, they don't mind, reading in general. And I think for, building your reading skills, reading is really helpful.
Yes, it's all about practice. It's all, Malcolm Gladwell just published a book called Outliers. And it was really interesting because he had a chapter about how to become an expert on anything. And according to his hypothesis, anyone can become an expert at anything if they spend a certain amount of hours. And I believe he said it was 10,000 hours. So now, I'm not telling you guys that you have to read for 10,000 hours. But let's say that I wanted to become the best violinist so that I could play violin in Carnegie Hall.
Right.
The only difference between me and someone who plays violin at Carnegie Hall is the amount of time the person put into practicing the violin, right?
Right.
So I'll give you another example. The Beatles. Everyone says, oh, the Beatles, greatest rock band of all time. Oh, they had this natural talent. The Beatles practiced for 16 hours a day when they first started. They didn't wake up and they were like, now we're the Beatles.
Yeah.
It was this progress, and they were practicing 16 hours a day until they got good enough to perform on the stage when they went to Germany, and then got on the Ed Sullivan Show, and then they blew up. The Beatles got good. The Beatles are the most famous rock band of all time. There's a picture of them back there. Because, that's them. Because they practiced.
Right.
Because they practiced. So you guys, you can't, there's no, I've literally had students say to me, what's the magic or what's the trick? And the answer is practice. And it might not be what you want to hear, but it's the truth.
Right. And but there's also smart practice, and then getting a book like yours that gives them strategies, like you said. And also I think it's really important what you mentioned was to have an answer key that explains correct and incorrect choices, that can explain why you got something right or wrong, because you need that feedback. You need that kind of feedback of what you're doing well and what you're not doing well. So I think the feedback element is really crucial. So good, I think that's great. And I just 1 or 2 more questions right now. Is we're in just about the summer of 2020, and there's still the COVID situation, and a lot of people still have the option for taking the home edition of the test. I'm not sure when anybody's going to be watching this, but maybe it's over by now, hopefully. But if you have the choice, would you recommend the home edition of the test?
Okay, I have thoughts about that. Obviously, for pharmacists, it's out of the question. So there's no point in me saying it for pharmacists. So pharmacists, close your ears.
Right.
Everyone else, I do recommend it.
Right.
I
Right.
actually think this is a golden opportunity for the rest of you. And the reason I say that is because actually my degree is in psychology, not
Oh,
English.
okay.
Yeah, in psychology. And one of the things that we learned as I went through psychology was we learned about test taking. And
Mm,
we learned that students perform better in tests when they take it in the same environment they studied.
right.
Which is why all of you who are studying in complete silence and then going to test centers get so flustered and say to me, why did I get 27 at home on the listening and then when I did the test I got 20? The answer is because there's something about being in the same environment that our brain responds in a more positive way when we're being tested. Some of it's obvious, like you're comfortable, it's quieter, but part of it is unexplained. It's just the way the brain is wired. You're
Oh,
wired
wow.
to do better in the same study environment that you studied in when you take the test. So all that means is for all of you who have a little study room like this, who are studying
Mhm.
in that study room, that's where you should take the test.
Right. Right.
You
So you
have a
said
really good opportunity to raise your score right now with this home test.
that's great. Yeah. So there's something about the psychology of the environment that you're more comfortable in your room, and so it'll probably have a positive impact on your performance because you're comfortable, pretty
It's
much.
100% true.
Yeah.
There's a name for it in psychology, but it just escapes me right now. But it's actually like it's a well documented phenomenon. It's not something that I'm just like making up. It's
Right. 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 Right.
when I got my degree, they were talking about that back in 2004 when I got my degree. That reveals my age a little bit.
I mean, for me, that doesn't sound like very long ago, but
2014. I'm in 2014. That's what
yeah. Well, anyway, Kathy, thank you. I'll close it out there, and just let me know, and let everybody know, where they can find you, where they can find out more about you and your what you do and what you're doing now.
Okay, my website is www.houseoftofl.com. And I have a lot of videos too you can watch on YouTube. Just go to Kathy TOEFL Teacher. Everything I post on YouTube is completely free. I do little lessons. Some of them are PowerPoint, some of them are on my whiteboard, but they're totally free. So you can see lots and lots and lots of videos of me teaching if that's something that interests you. And you can go to my website too, and you can book private lessons with me as well. And also, of course, my book is on Amazon.
Right, and Master the TOEFL Reading, and in the third edition right now, right?
Yeah, get the third edition. The second or the first edition aren't going to hurt you, but the third edition has been updated to 2020 to reflect more, a little more heavier on the negative detail and the detail questions.
Okay.
And I added an extra full test at the end and added a lot more examples. So yeah, the third edition, Mastering the Reading section of the TOEFL IBT.
Mastering the Reading. Okay, great. Okay, so I'll put a link in the description to it as well. And so, but Kathy, thank you so much.
Thank you, Josh. Thanks for having me.